Hello everyone, I'm Long, a lecturer from ULIS VNU. In this mini lecture, we will be thinking about the ways in which we teach reading and listening in the foreign and second language classroom, so we can have a clearer idea about what materials we should use when teaching these two skills. More details of how we choose and attract materials for teaching reading and listening will be discussed in the next two mini lectures. In these mini lectures, we start by comparing the ways in which we read outside the classroom and the ways in which we ask our learners to reading in the classroom. We think about what to consider for teaching reading and listening in the communicative language classroom. We go on to take a quick look at three-paced reading lesson and how it can integrate with a task-based approach to language learning. Think about the last time you read a text that was not a student essay, such as a newspaper article, a novel, a political statement for an election, a professional journal, or listen to a radio program, news on TV. Not a listening exercise. Presumably, you read the text or listen to the program because it interested you. At some point, during or after reading or listen, you probably discuss it with a friend or a partner, perhaps giving a short summary, or you may have read a line aloud or just chuckle to yourself. In any case, what you did was engage in an ongoing, continuous reaction to what you were reading. Maybe you were bored and stopped reading or listening. Later, you may have acted on some of the information. If this were a professional text, you may have written down one or two important points, or make mental notes. You may have gone out and bought a CD that was reviewed favorably. Compare this with what your learners had to do the last time you used a text or listening exercise in the classroom. You probably introduced the passage or the listening exercise with a pre-reading or pre-listening activity. Ask the learner to read the text or listen to the recording, and then did a number of comprehension exercises. You might also have done some vocabulary exercises with them, which has nothing to do with the actual text or recording, but focus on useful vocabulary in it. You then probably assigned some homework tasks on the text or recording before the lesson finished. So, the way we treat reading in the classroom is diametrically opposed to the way we carry out this activity in our real life, as you see in the table. What message, then, are we sending to our learners when we use text in the classroom? The underlying message, I believe, is that reading or listening is something that you do in order to learn a language. Learners engage with a text or listening a track as a linguistic object, rather than as a vehicle for information which matter to the learners. Now, you might say that this does not matter, and that classroom life does not necessarily strive to be a mirror of real life. However, one of the complaints that I often hear teachers make is that students do not read outside the classroom, either in their first language or second language, and rarely listen in second language. In such a context, I believe the subconscious messages that we are sending our learners about reading and listening are vitally important, and that what we should be doing in the classroom should mimic the real process of reading. I just spoke about the differences between reading outside the classroom and reading in the language classroom. The classrooms I discussed were classes where what was taught was what is known as intensive reading. Intensive reading has been defined as a type of reading that happens in class, directed by the teacher using a text that learners would be unlikely to read successfully without assistance. There are two problems with intensive reading. Firstly, we use too much, and secondly, teachers do it poorly. I would like to consider a third problem with lessons such as this, which present texts that are difficult for the learners and which very often focus on linguistic issues rather than on the message. So, classic tests as linguistic objects. The issue for me is this: what message are we sending our learners when we use text in the classroom in this way? If all we do is to use text to manage for language items or to manage for language patterns, then the underlying message is that we consider reading as something that you do only to learn a language, and that the purpose of reading is to learn a language. And this point of view can become the hidden agenda of the classroom. We are not conveying the message that reading is enjoyable or that it is an important source of information and knowledge about topics of interest and important issues. Now, it's true that there are elements in the classroom which are never going to be like the real world, and the learners accept this. But at the same time, many scholars and teachers do believe that what we do in the classroom needs to mirror our behaviors outside the classroom. Indeed, the basic premise underlying communicative language teaching is that it is vital, maybe not always, but in most cases, it is vital to focus on meaning rather than focus on linguistic form in the language classroom. So, what should we consider for the teaching of reading or listening in a foreign language? The first thing to consider is that reading or listening is a communicative act. It is common for teachers to relate listening to communicative activities, but reading is as communicative as listening. It's a writer communicating to their reader. We also communicate about our reading. So, in a classroom that takes a task approach to language teaching seriously, we absolutely must focus on the meaning of the text or the recording. And we also have to ensure that the learners communicate to each other about the text or the recording. Secondly, we need to think about how we help our learners to develop reading and listening comprehension. The third thing to consider is that we need to reach some sort of authenticity of text in order to let our learners see how reading and listening is something that they could enjoy and that contributes something to their understanding of the world. And this leads me to the next point. We need to be very clear in our minds what the objective of our reading and listening lessons and the objectives of the activities are. The overall objective is, of course, to learn the language. But different tasks and different activities can be focused on, for example, reading or listening to learn the language, reading and listening to learn something else, or learning to read or learning to listen. Each of these will require a different approach. Of course, we use text or recordings in order to learn the language. But this can also be done implicitly And part of what we are talking about in this part is the fact that learning is often implicit. Learning to read or to listen is also an important role. There are many types of reading and listening, and many types of reading and listening behavior. And we change how we read or listen according to our purpose. So, we also need to think about how to teach that as well. And finally, through a focus on the meaning of a text or recording, to making connections with what the text or the recording means to us, what the text or recording means to each of the readers in the classroom, we also bring in the idea that we read or listen in order to learn. Finally, we need to take into account the readings and listenings that our learners probably actually do. We need to think about what they might be interested in reading and listening about, and we need to think about where they find texts or the recordings that they're interested in. They might be reading or listening much more electronically through the computer or tablets, and our teaching of reading and listening need to take into account this shift in literacy practice. Now we will take a quick look at the three-phase reading and listening lesson, so we can have a clearer idea about materials we should use. It's now common to think of the most intensive reading or listening lessons as consisting of three phases: the pre-reading phase, the while reading or listening phase, and the post-reading or listening phase. The pre-reading or listening phase is easy to define. It is on the activities or tasks that the learners are asked to do before they actually read or listen to the text. This stage has a number of purposes. It often includes a focus on vocabulary in order to ensure that the learners know the words crucial to understanding the text or the recording. So, this is linguistic preparation for the text or the recording. A second purpose of pre-reading activities is to raise awareness of the topic of the text or the recording, and to provide background information about some aspects of this topic. In this way, we try to ensure that the learners understand the context in which the text or the recording was written or taken, and don't misunderstand crucial points. The pre-reading or listening stage is also the stage where the learner's interest in the topics is aroused. And finally, a really important element of pre-reading or listening activities is that they need to provide a purpose for reading the text or listening to the recording. So, although the text or the listening is still chosen by the teachers, through using well-chosen pre-reading or pre-listening activity, the teacher can bring the student to the point where they want to read the text or listen to the recording, and they know why they are reading it or listening to it. They have a purpose. This goes back to the idea that reading or listening in the classroom needs to be similar to reading outside the classroom. In real life, we know why we read a certain text or listen to a certain recording, and we know what our purpose is. So for me, it is the most important factor when constructing a pre-reading or listening activity. It needs to connect to the purpose for reading the text or listening to the recording. It is interesting to observe that, as Eddie Williams has pointed out, during the pre-reading or listening stage, the focus is on the learner. What the learner might know about the topic of the text or the recording, and what ideas the learner might bring to their reading of the text or listening to the recording. There are many types of pre-reading or listening activities. One type of pre-reading or listening activities deals with vocabulary. Some pre-reading or listening activities include prediction of the content of the text or the recording, prediction from the title, prediction from illustrations, or prediction from a list of some of the words to be found in the text. Another activity simply asks learners a few questions about the topic in preparation. The while reading or listening stage is a stage which draws on the text or the recording rather than the learner's idea previous to reading or listening. So it's about the interaction between the learner and the text or the recording. The purpose is to understand the text or recording, and the activities need to help the learner reach comprehension. In the while reading or listening stage, learners are often asked to transfer information from a text or recording to a table or to a graph, take notes, prepare summaries, and etc. Possibly, the most well-known while reading or listening activity is the traditional comprehension question. Comprehension questions normally fall into one of three types: true forms, multiple choice, or open questions. The advantage of comprehension questions is that they're easy to write or construct. And if the teacher goes through them with the class and the class answers them together, the teachers will have ensured that everyone has understood the task. We can ask ourselves, however, whether comprehension questions actually teach the learners how to read or how to listen, and how to achieve comprehension. Some scholars suggest that comprehension questions only test whether the class had understood what the text or recording says. By answering comprehension questions, the learners do not learn skills or strategies that they can take and apply to the next text or recording that they will read or listen. And if we want to focus on learning to read or learning to listen, then we need to think about the way in which today's teaching will help the learners read tomorrow's text or listen to tomorrow's recording. Finally, the post-reading or listening phase moves away from the text and recording. The post-reading phase aims to consolidate or reflect upon what has been read or listened, and it aims to relate the text or the recording to the learner's own knowledge, interests, or views. So the teachers may put the student into groups in which they discuss topics connected with the text or the recording, or ask the learners to read other texts or listen to other recordings on the same topic or similar topic, and so on. I have presented the traditional view of three-phase lesson and the traditional ways in which it's been implemented. Now I would like to examine a task-based lesson and see how it can integrate with the traditional three-phase lesson. In general, task-based activities. Lessons or sequence of lessons have been described in terms of three phases. These three phases reflect a chronological order in which they occur. The first phase is the pre-task stage. This stage includes the range of activities that teachers and students can do before they begin the task. The second or during task phase concerns the task itself. The final phase is referred to as the post-task phase. This phase entails activities and procedures that are completed as a follow-up to task performance. The pre-task phase aims to prepare the performance of the task in order to make sure that it is conducive to language acquisition. This can be achieved by introducing activities that enable students to focus on language in addition to content while they engage in the task itself. Two types of pre-task work can assist in meeting this goal: language-focused activities and content-focused activities. Language-focused activities may introduce new language, for example, in the form of vocabulary or grammar. They may also recycle existing linguistic resources, for example, reminding students of vocabulary items and grammar they have previously covered. Content-focused activities engage learners with the topic of the forthcoming task. Several pre-task procedures have been proposed to realize these goals, including rehearsal the task at hand or a similar task, observing the performance of a parallel task, allowing for planning time, framing the task by explaining the procedures and the intended outcome, providing background knowledge, and finally introducing or mobilizing task stress event language. For example, highlighting or predicting useful vocabulary. In the during task stage, learners focus on actually completing the task. At this stage, students may work individually, in pairs or groups. Teachers may opt to work with students closely, providing assistance with task-relevant language, ensuring that the intended task procedures are followed, or assessing learners' language and progress towards task outcome. Alternatively, teachers might assume a more passive role and offer help to students only when communication problems arise or when students request it. In the during task phase, a primary focus on meaning is encouraged, whereas the post-task stage is generally seen as a platform for promoting more explicit attention to form, grammar, and language. In this stage, students may be asked to repeat the task in front of an audience. Another frequently employed post-task activity involves asking students to report back to the class about their task outcome. In this case, a teacher can act as a moderator. So, it is a real parallel to a three-phase lesson. In terms of the importance of meaning, it shows that the comprehend questions in while reading or listening phase focus on meaning. But to some extent, this focus is decontextualized and nothing is actually done with its meaning. There is no communicative problem to solve. There is no relationship with real-world activities. Although completing a summary, which is a common activity in both phases, could be seen as having a relationship to the need to write a summary of a text in some cases, but the activity is not assessed in terms of a non-linguistic outcome. So, although the three-phase lessons has parallels with the three-phase of a task-based approach, this does not mean that a lesson which had a pre, while, and post-reading or listening structures is going to be a task-based lesson. So what examples are there of a task-based lesson? We will look at a classic example of a task-based reading lesson, which is jigsaw reading. In a jigsaw reading task, different groups of learners read different texts on the same topic. Once they have achieved an understanding of the text, new groups are formed with a representative of each of the previous groups. The task then asks the learner to use the information from the different texts to achieve a common goal. For example, the initial groups receive different texts with different information about a new nation, its history, its geography, its people and custom. Once they have read and reached an understanding of their text, new groups are formed with one person from each of the original groups. And the task is now to design a flag that will represent this new nation based on the information from the different groups. Overall, as you can see in our lesson today, reading and listening in language classroom is apparently not a mirror of reading and listening outside the classroom. However, what we should be doing in the classroom should mimic the real process of reading and listening. Besides, we should consider several things such as objectives of our reading or listening lesson and readings and listenings that our learners probably actually do, and understand the traditional three-phase reading and listening lessons as well as task-based approach. So our learners can both read and listen to learn, and learn to read and listen. Hopefully, through this lesson, you can have a better understanding about teaching reading and listening in a language classroom. Thank you for watching.